2/3 of the global workforce is disengaged. That's about 2.3 billion people feeling meh or much worse about their work. The cost of that disengagement is about $9 trillion annually. Good thing we don't have any significant problems to deal with that could benefit from some of that cash. If we did, we might pay more attention to those engagement numbers. Maybe even make a big deal out of them. Put them front and center in our political debates, perhaps. A fellow can dream, right? Or we could do what Julie Jungalwala is doing. Julie has made it her mission to unlock human potential so we can take on the immense challenges we face in the world and help all of us feel more connected to and fulfilled by our work. Easy, right? Well, Julie has some pretty awesome ideas on how to make this happen, and we dove into a whole slew of them on this week's episode of the DesuckifyWork Podcast. First, embrace your inner scientist. Be curious, run small experiments, and make choices based on your learnings, even if they feel uncomfortable at first. This builds the muscle to take bigger steps towards the work you truly want to do. Second, be vulnerable, especially if you're a leader. Talk about areas where you are seeking growth, so you invite others to feel safe doing the same. And third, help your team connect the dots between the work they do and the organization's broader vision and strategy. When people understand how their work contributes to the bigger picture, they go all in, and that energy is infectious. Julie dives into all of this and so much more during our conversation. I came away feeling inspired and energized about the future we can create together. I think you will too. Okay, Julie Jungalwala, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast.
Thank you for having me, TJ. And thank you for the name as well. That's a great name for a podcast.
Thank you. Definitely having some fun with it. Before we dive into too much, of the good stuff here, let's just get some background. Can you tell us, what do you do for work and a little bit about maybe how you came to be doing it?
Sure. So I've been working for over 20 years at this point in leadership development, organization development, and the intersection of those. Mm-hmm. My love is coaching. My love is one-on-one coaching and conducting workshops. And over the years, a theme has emerged, which is really helping people become ever more authentic versions of themselves and to be fully self-expressed in their work. It can be a tall order sometimes, and we go through different stages in life when we're conscious of what we're doing and maybe less conscious, but that's been the theme, and it continues to evolve and take different shapes and different forms. But that's what brings us to today, 2024.
Yeah, I feel like that's been, something that people have been talking about, how to show up more authentically at work. And as you said, I think it can be a challenge. I think on both ends, right? We don't necessarily feel like we have permission to do that. And then organizationally, a lot of cultures aren't really structured to invite that. We'll dive into this a little bit deeper in a bit, but I'm just curious, kind of maybe at a top line level, what do you think keeps organizations from inviting that more freely?
Well, I think today's organizations are still, for the most part, structured around a hierarchical model. And the challenge, the beauty and the challenge of that model is it's very hard to change because a system will always have the output for which it was originally designed. More flexible networks are clearly the way forward, but it is exceptionally difficult to shift a structure from one that's based on a hierarchy to one that's much more flexible. So I think it's the structural pieces that get in the way. Yeah. And I've sort of gone through some, I guess, changes of thinking over the years where I started out in training and development, where I was teaching workshops and then realizing after workshops, well, these people are going back into the same system. And if the system doesn't change and doesn't support this new behavior, then
Right.
what chance do we have? So then I shifted gears and focused more so on the structural side of things. And then I realized that well, structures don't change. People who change structures. So I'm back to people and the power of the individual, and even more so with the collective to enact change.
Well, I think there's certainly a lot of work to be done there from my observation. So I'm grateful that you're doing it. Before we dive too deep into maybe how you're starting to unlock some of that stuff, I'd love to get your perspective for you personally. What role does work play in your life?
I would say that work is pretty much central to my life because I love the questions that I have the privilege to be asking myself. Questions such as, is it possible to design and build and live a life of your own choosing, regardless of demography? I've had the honor and privilege of teaching in places that I love and working with people that I love. So I much prefer the whole frame of work-life integration as opposed to work-life balance, because I don't think we're ever going to get balance, and balance is probably not even a goal that we should aim towards, but rather how are things integrated? I think I mentioned to you before that I'm an older mother, so I have a 6-year-old. So it used to be, before I was a mom, that I would wake up and be working and go to bed, having stopped work and eating a few meals in between times. Now I'm much more structured. Okay, it's a hard stop at 5 or 5:30. If something super time sensitive has to happen, I can make it happen. But that's more so outside of the norm these days than it used to be previously. So family is much more central, probably than it used to be. And I celebrated my 50th birthday earlier this year, so
well,
I'm
happy
more
50th.
Shift.
Welcome to the club.
I'm enjoying it. My niece back in Ireland said, "Are you feeling?" My brother actually, "Are you feeling nifty at 50?" And definitely feeling nifty at 50.
Excellent. Yeah, it's not so bad. That question of integration is an interesting one, because I think I get the sense that maybe that means something different to some different people. Like for some people, that can be an invitation to blur boundaries. So how do you integrate your work with your life? And I think, sort of at an idea level, I like the concept, because we're the same person. Our life isn't necessarily so like I step into work and I become this person, and then I step out of work and I become some other person. But that boundary issue can be challenging, right? It can be really easy to let it just bleed into the point where we're always on, and therefore, you talk about the context of family, maybe not as present. Even if we're with our family, we're not as present as we could be because work has found a way in. So how do you integrate work into your life while also maintaining some boundaries with some of those other areas of your life that you really want to pay attention to?
Sure. I think what works for me, it sounds really simple, but the days that I don't do it, I find things get kind of blurry. I wake up, I do a little bit of meditation, get the coffee in the system, and then I just look at my work for the day, my priorities, and decide what are the 3 things. These are the 1 to 3 things. If I get these done, this is a win. And anything after that's gravy. But these are the 3 things. Because there is just way too much stuff on any given day to do. And I find that a lot with my coaching clients as well. The list is never ending. And I was actually working with a client once, and she said the email was just completely out of control. So we did some, triage on the email, and she set up some nice systems. And then during the next coaching session, she said, "Julie, I might actually be screwed, because it turns out the more emails I respond to, the more I receive in return. So this is a Sisyphean task."
Yeah. It's very true. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but it's like, yeah, it's just it's a self-perpetuating system,
Mhm.
um, more
Yeah,
so than one that you can kind of get on the right side of. Um,
yeah.
and I think
And
we're all in it. I mean, if you talk structurally, I think sort of structurally, the world of um, knowledge work, for lack of a better term, um, it it will grow to the size that we allow it to grow to,
mhm.
because there is always more to do. And so um, you need to be mindful individually in terms of how that affects your own life, but you also do need to be mindful on the structural side. And I imagine you talked about kind of coming back into the human side of like the people who are
Mhm.
in those structures. So as part of your leadership coaching work, is that part of what you're also helping people work through, is how to create better structures so that it invites a slightly more sane way of working for everybody?
Yes, right now I'm working more so at the individual level. So
Mm-hmm.
it's working with folks. It's usually one or some of the following.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be feeling completely overwhelmed. Like folks have described, I have
Mm-hmm.
a five pound chicken and a 3 pound pot. I literally can't get to what I
Mm-hmm.
need to get to.
Yeah.
And then there are some folks for whom more often senior, where they've achieved a lot and they're usually the high achievers, type A's.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'm losing my mojo. It's not that anything's wrong. And actually, if I
Yeah.
were to complain about it, nobody would listen to me because
Mm-hmm.
everything on the outside seems like, it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty hunky dory.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling the same energy and excitement that I used to.
Mm-hmm.
Next step would be retirement in 10, 20, 25 years. But the golf course doesn't appeal to me. And there's only so much Netflix a person can watch in any given day.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's something else, but I'm not sure what it is,
Mm-hmm.
or I have a sense of what it might be, but there's no way I could do that. And here are the 10 reasons why
Mm-hmm.
not. Just feeling a little bit stuck there sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like that is a very common feeling these days. I think COVID maybe shook up our perception or our attunement to really wanting things to connect to who we
Mm-hmm.
are more deeply. I think we rightly, in my mind, expect that more now,
Mm-hmm.
where we could have maybe just had the blinders on a little bit before and just been going. So when somebody gets to that place, um, I think the initial instinct for a lot of folks is, well, I need to do something different. You know,
Mm-hmm.
is that always the case, or is there often a way for people to find a way to reconnect to what they do, but just maybe understand themselves a little better so they can understand how better to connect to their work in a way that really feeds them?
Yeah. It it can be both. Or
Mm-hmm.
either or, I should say.
Yeah.
Some cases, it's a case of, this is just not working. And there's
Mm-hmm.
this other thing, this other idea, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to start pursuing that. Uh, I would say probably more often, though, it's folks either changing their relationship to what they're doing
Mm-hmm.
or making a tweak, either a small one or a big one, to what's existing. And it makes
Mm-hmm.
all the difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of a client who was really starting to feel burnt out and had a 2 week vacation and then started coaching. And we just started, okay, well, what would you like to see more of?
Mm-hmm.
I like going to conferences and I like speaking and I like, okay, could that be part of your existing work? For sure, they would love that. It would get the brand out there, so on and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. And, there's this project that, I could probably launch if I wanted because, uh,
Mm-hmm.
I do lead this function after all. And it was just, having a break. Like, don't underestimate the power of getting a break.
Yeah.
And a real break, don't check the email,
Mm-hmm.
take the time, go somewhere where your washing machine and dishwasher isn't within walking distance,
Uh-huh.
and take that break. And then, okay, uh, I'm in a position of authority here. I could make
Mm-hmm.
decisions. What might that look like?
Yeah.
And even down to the nitty gritty. My ALG co-founder Jenny taught me this. Looking at your calendar, is there anything you want to change this week?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of you guys, well, this is what I must do.
Right.
There's stuff there you agreed to maybe 6 months ago, and maybe that still pertains, and maybe it doesn't, and maybe things have shifted, and maybe some things are okay. So, given what we have in the calendar, are you still agreed that should be happening this particular week?
That's such an interesting exercise because I think we're so on autopilot with our calendar, right? We're just it's sometimes self-populating. I mean, we get invited to things and it just happens, and then other things we're just so used to doing them every week. It's like, okay, I'm going to do that on Wednesday. I'm going to do that on Thursday. I know I need to do these things. That there's a lack of intention, and what I heard a little bit in this person that you were coaching, a lack of awareness of their own agency. Like, oh, well, I do lead that function. I do have the ability to do this. Like, I think even at levels that maybe where you're not necessarily leading fully, we can often underestimate our own agency to make change and to potentially make work better for us. What do you think's going on there? Why are we blinded to our ability to impact our own lives in that way?
I think it speaks to what you just mentioned, which is we are well-intentioned and we're good people and we're responsible people and we're doing the right thing. And then it sometimes takes a creative act just to take a step back and say, well, what else might be possible here? And I think it's oftentimes why we feel an energy in a new position. It's because you're looking at everything from first principles. You're looking at your calendar and you're deciding what goes in, as opposed to this is the default calendar and I will, this is what happens. Yeah. So now you've sparked an idea, TJ, which maybe it is, we should fire ourselves once every 3 years. We want to rehire ourselves back in this job. And if we did, let's look at the job description. Do we still want that, or does it need an overhaul? And given that, what projects would be fun and exciting and have an impact? And then given that, what should that calendar look like to support that kind of work?
That's such an interesting concept, right? To kind of literally take ourselves out of that job or that role or whatever and come back in with fresh eyes and a fresh spirit to go, well, what could this look like? Now I'm new. I'm coming back in now, like, to accomplish the things I believe I want to accomplish. What should my day be filled with? Who should I be collaborating with? We get so weighed down by the the momentum of just being in it that to get out of it is such a gift. And I think, you mentioned your client who took a vacation, and I think that can be great. This is a little more of an extreme example, but I've spoken to a couple people who, I come from the world of advertising, and there's definitely a lot of burnout kind of stuff. People feeling that it's always been kind of a crazy busy space, but in the last few years, maybe more so. And there's a couple people who said they actually stepped away from the industry for 3 months, 6 months. And, not everybody can do that. I get it. But what they found was it just allowed them to come back in, I think, with that same kind of mindset, which is, okay, how do I want to exist in this space now? It's almost new to me again. And I don't have to kind of bear the weight of all the years before that. And what people find is, oh, I'm falling back in love with this thing, so I think the notion of giving ourselves a break to get clarity is just beautiful. Whether it's a week break, more, I love that. Do you find, more of your clients are open to that kind of thing, to really step away from it, to maybe sort of fire themselves for 2 weeks and go away and then come back fresh?
I think there is more of an understanding with regards to how critical time off is. Now, some industries are more enlightened than others. Yeah. But I think, and of course, there has to be the obligatory insert of a neuroscience quote at this point. But the neuroscience is really backing up what is we've always thought of as common sense, which is your brain actually needs it. And you've probably experienced yourself when you're just going. And yes, we've all experienced the high that sometimes happens once you hit, like, you're tired, and then you hit some other level, and it's like you're on fumes, and it feels like you're unstoppable at that point. And you can do that for so long. And I remember during COVID, I had an extreme case of like fatigue, adrenal fatigue. And it was really instructive because I had always been really good in my 20s and 30s about just like blowing through tiredness and just completely ignoring it. And then nothing like having a toddler to wake you up to your own nonsense and say, well, is this something you'd like to continue, or might you want to shift what you're doing here, because it's not just about you anymore.
That's a great point. I want to shift gears a little bit, just because I think the world of work is shifting in a way that has a lot of people maybe feeling a little disturbed and uncomfortable. There's new technology coming in. There's just the pace of things seems to continually get more rapid. And you at one point, I think you did some research on human reinvention, and underneath all that, I think the idea that who we need to, or who we should be in the world of work, is changing, and how we can show up with more of who we are, right? Not simply, I think, the authenticity, but all that we bring has the ability to touch the things that we're doing. We're often very like using a limited piece of ourselves. So there's so much potential that we're not unearthing in the workspace. And I imagine there's reasons on both sides, individually and structurally there. But what has your research shown, and what are you seeing as the way forward potentially for us to tap into more of our potential in the workplace?
Sure. So it's that research that we conducted, and that started with the academic leadership group and my partner Jenny. It really brought home for me how, when an individual listens to that very quiet voice in their head, TJ, what if you did this? And then there's some other bigger version of TJ tells that person to shut up. But if big TJ listens to that voice, TJ not only benefits, but the people around him do as well. Organization benefits. So there were examples of like, and I have friends and colleagues and clients. It just retains across the board. This is one big example. A friend who was a special education teacher in Brooklyn, and she noticed that it would take her up to 6 months, sometimes 9 months, to work out the gears of each child in her class and what they needed in order to focus and to really access their executive functioning. And she would have all of these little tips and hacks, and like some kids, they would really benefit from having Velcro under their desk. Some, so they could touch it and ground themselves. Some would benefit from sitting on a bouncy ball. Some needed very regular breaks, just what each individual particular kid needed. But then that kid would leave, go into the next grade, and that information didn't go with them. And the parent oftentimes didn't have access to it, and the student may or may not be aware of it either. So she started to compile binders for each kid, and then like pass the binder along with the child in the next grade. And she had an idea this could maybe be a business, because other special education teachers would benefit from this as well. And she went, she describes how she went to a coffee shop with a mentor, the tech guy at her school, and he said, this is great, but you need to lose those binders. There's a thing called an app
Sure.
Really help you with that. So long story short, she tried to do the work in the school, but they just weren't supportive. And she had this moment where she realized, I need to give this the best shot I can. So she handed in a resignation, wrote the letter in tears, and has since started an incredible organization which is impacting thousands of kids. So that's just one example. And I could think of at least 50 more. When you start to do the work that's in your heart to do, that's what changes systems and structures.
Yeah.
That's why you're here. I often say every single person on this planet, zero exceptions. And I'm a learning school junkie. We each have a curriculum inside of us that we are here to live and to learn. So the more we can be living and learning it, the more fulfilled we are. It doesn't mean it's all, fairies and pixie dust and everything is fine. There are challenges for sure on that path, but it's a worthwhile challenge. It's challenge that you're willing to fully engage with, because that's why you're here.
How do we connect to the voice that is nudging us there and somehow tell the other voice that it's going to be okay, because you get it. We all hear that voice, and many of us have dreams or visions for things we'd want to do. It's the book we've been wanting to write for years, or the dream job that we thought we would go after, but now, I don't know if I can. Or even as simple as like what we were talking about, like I'm in a role within an organization, I see potential for change, and I actually think I could impact it, but something is blocking me. Some voice is saying, well, that's not really your job, or that's not your responsibility, or what if it doesn't go the way you want? What helps us through those inevitable doubts so that we can step into that particular version of ourselves?
There's a mini framework that I use, and this came out of the research, and it's 3 very simple things.
Okay.
Follow your curiosity, run experiments, and make choices. And I would add an umbrella of make it so small your nervous system can handle it.
Okay.
So instead of going from I have no book to here's a book, internal freak out, there's no way here.
Yeah.
Here are the 20 reasons why I shouldn't even attempt this. To what if I just wrote a paragraph? What if I just do you say tweet anymore? I don't know. Do you say X?
I feel like people still say tweet. I don't know.
Write a paragraph.
Yeah.
Or if you, like example you mentioned, I see something I might want to change in my organization. What if you spoke to somebody else about that? Just had a conversation.
Yeah.
And so just follow that curiosity. So be curious. And then run experiments. What's the smallest, tiniest, and ideally fun experiment that you could run?
And I'm imagining what happens there is, okay, I run that experiment. I don't get struck by lightning. I don't, get run out of the building. Life is okay. Maybe I even enjoyed it. Like you said, maybe it was fun to have that conversation or to write that paragraph. And therefore, maybe I'm ready to take a slightly bigger experiment the next time and allow that curiosity to kind of continue to open up. Is that something you noticed in the research that people do that and it follows that path if they stick to those kind of three tenets?
Yes, very much so. I originally thought that the first one, to be curious, was find your purpose. But when we looked at the data, that's not what people were doing. They weren't asking themselves, what is my purpose? What they were actually doing was following what they were curious about. And that makes it a bit more doable to me, because sometimes finding your purpose can feel overwhelming, which I totally understand. But the follow your curiosity, that's what people were doing. They were trying stuff. And they were and yes, some tried big things and some tried small things, but they were trying stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And having tried something, they learned something, which then enabled them to make a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So they were making decisions. And it was interesting, just going with experience over time, where people get stuck is exactly with those three things as well.
Mm-hmm.
So not being curious,
Mm-hmm.
that you start to feel a deadening in your life when that happens. You don't
Mm-hmm.
need to give yourself permission to follow a trailhead.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you do follow a trailhead, but you just think about it,
Mm-hmm.
dream about it. You're not actually doing anything.
Yeah.
You can spend an entire lifetime having big dreams, but that's all they'll ever be.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe I'm following my curiosity, I'm running experiments, and I'm running experiments, and I'm doing it again, and doing it again, and doing it again, but I'm not actually making a choice.
Mm.
I'm
What
learning, but I'm not making a different choice.
So what does that choice look like? If let's say I run the experiment, say I write the paragraph that connects to maybe this idea I have for a book, and um, what would be an example of a choice that comes out of that experiment?
Mm-hmm. So writing the paragraph, a choice would be, okay, I'm going to write another one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to write another one. Oh, I think I have an article.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's an internal thing. Nobody can tell you what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So the next thing might be, oh, I could send that to TJ and see if he might post it on his website. Oh, no, that's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could.
Mm-hmm.
So, but maybe I keep it too much on my desktop or my Dropbox.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of me saying, Julie, put it out there. TJ, put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
Send it to somebody for feedback.
Yeah.
Pitch an article over here. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like following the breadcrumbs.
Mm. Okay.
Curiosity, the experiments, the choices. Follow the breadcrumbs,
Mm.
and think of it as you're also building a muscle.
Mm-hmm.
So the usual example of running a marathon, you don't go from sedentary to 26.2 miles.
No.
Walk to the end of the block,
Yeah.
and you build a muscle.
Mm.
And that's what you're doing. So when I think about be curious, run experiments, make choices, and it's sort of like it's like a wheel or a pie chart in my head, then you learn, adapt, and grow. You learn, adapt, and grow. You learn, adapt, and grow. And it's the human evolutionary impulse to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So when we don't follow that curiosity, we're stagnating our growth.
Mm. Mm-hmm. What do you think, beyond like the sort of stagnation of our own growth? What are the costs of whether it's one of us not following the curiosity, running experiments, and making those choices, or sort of more collectively, a lot of us not doing that and maybe not stepping into our full potential? What do we lose when people aren't doing that?
I think we lose our life force.
Mm. Yeah. What do we lose as a society, do you think?
So if we have, I think of it, you probably read that Gallup statistic that typically 2/3 of employees are disengaged globally.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes up or down a few percentage points, but
mm-hmm.
it hasn't changed materially in
Yeah.
decades, despite all of the great work that's been happening with them within our organizations. So that translates as 2/3 of the workforce worldwide either disengaged or completely checked out during the majority of their waking hours.
Mm.
So that's on one side of the balance sheet.
Yeah.
On the other side of the balance sheet, we have really big problems that we have created for ourselves.
Yes, we do.
And it's the human beings that will solve them.
Mm-hmm.
But we're over here, disengaged and checked out.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're sitting with.
Yeah. And what's interesting, I think on some level, maybe because so many of us are disengaged, I'm not even sure that a lot of folks equate the work they do to solving any kind of meaningful problem,
Hmm.
right? Meaning work is simply a place to show up, earn some money, and tolerate. And a lot of times, I don't think, particularly if you're not at the higher levels, you don't even know what problems you're trying to solve with that business or that team or that organization. It's just not really well communicated. So is part of this, it feels like there's lots of pieces here to kind of help us unlock the human potential and solve some of these problems. One of them might be, I'm curious what your take on this is, like, how can leaders be better at painting a better picture for the teams to understand, like, no, here's what you're doing. You're not simply filling out that report or having that meeting every week or whatever the things are, but that is serving this greater need, and we're solving a certain problem here. One, do you agree that maybe is a challenge? And two, how might we improve upon it?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it is a challenge for sure. And there's a lot that leaders can do to help translate strategy into how your job is supporting this and helping to make this happen. So ideally,
Mm-hmm.
as a leader, uh, there is a vision for the company, there is a strategy,
Mm-hmm.
and on one side, and then you've got the job description of the person you're talking with, and
Mm-hmm.
ideally there's a fair amount of Venn diagram overlap.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't, then maybe there's a chance there for
Mm-hmm.
a reorg.
Yeah.
Too often, change happens by barnacle, where we stick things on and we don't actually look at things from first principles and say, given
Mm-hmm.
this vision, are we optimally set up in
Yeah.
order to achieve it?
Mm.
There's another piece, though, which your question got me thinking about. You might have heard of the phrase that you can have a job, a career, or a calling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all three are absolutely valid.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, being an official member of the midlife club, uh, a job is valid. I might have, and colleagues might have, like, parents who need extra care,
Mm-hmm.
maybe teenage children in crisis. There could be other
Mm-hmm.
demands which, at a particular point in time, take precedence.
Yeah.
And the job is a job.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
you might not be fully, maximally engaged, but are you able to contribute? Do you feel good about the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
And then maybe outside of the scope of the job, are there some other tweaks that you could make to keep yourself going
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that would be supportive?
Mm-hmm.
And are there tweaks that you could make there? So again, I think a job is valid.
Yeah.
And then I think about the care of the person and how they're taking care of themselves alongside with that.
Yeah. And I wonder if the person is more clear on the why of it all, meaning
Mm,
I have this job, and here's why here's why I am where I am, because I am paying attention to my kids or certain family needs, or it could be as simple as, like, we're saving up for a house, and
mhm,
this is going to get me there, and I understand that it's going to get me there, and I'm okay with that. That sort of creates the meaning
mhm.
in our lives that we need, so that it's like, yeah, I'm showing up for work, and yeah, I'm doing stuff that isn't maybe like giving me the most juice every day, but I also understand what's underneath it all and why it matters
Yes,
to me, right? Helping
yes.
connect
And
those
I'm not
dots.
beating myself up to have this job that,
Right.
engages me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to this idea of getting more out of us to help solve the big problems, I think, um, what else can we be doing, again, whether it's on the leadership front or the individual front, to potentially unlock more of that potential within us? What other barriers might there be that we can start to try to fiddle with a little bit that
Mm.
you've noticed?
Yeah, a big barrier can oftentimes be performance management processes.
Mm,
So, particularly in the larger organizations, I've seen it can be the tale of two cities. So on the one end, the more positive end, a really effective performance development process is galvanizing, it's inspirational, it helps unlock people's potential, it's
Mm-hmm.
with goals with your manager, it's a two-way dialogue, you're having regular feedback and coaching conversations, you're
Mm-hmm.
building skills. You can see clearly how this job fits into the bigger picture of the organization and also your short, medium, long-term career goals.
Mm-hmm.
We're checking a lot of great boxes here, and you're
Mm-hmm.
getting feedback that helps you. On the other end of the continuum, there is it's that time of the year again. Let's fill out this form and send it to HR and get
Mm-hmm.
back to the real work.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes those processes, nobody says explicitly, but I'm going to set myself goals that I can guarantee that I can meet that require no stretch because I want to make sure I meet them
Mm-hmm.
and get the bonus. And there's no innovation there. There's
Right.
no stretch. There's no creativity.
Mm-hmm.
So if I had a magic wand, I would love to see organizations have open conversations about, here's the strategy and like the concept of a job description. I'm not suggesting throwing it out because it would break me out in hives thinking of a multi-thousand number organization. Just forget your job description and show up today and decide what you want to do.
Yeah.
Could there be some sort of midway point or step along the path where we're saying, hey, let's start to have a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
What are some ideas you have? Here's the vision. Here's where we'd like to go.
Mm-hmm.
What new ideas do you have? What should we stop doing? What's not working? And have
Mm-hmm.
these sorts of open conversations
Yeah.
and see where that goes.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to the example you just gave, the person who has an idea for something in an organization. Could there be more of an open venue to
Mm-hmm.
have that conversation and to take action on it?
Yeah.
You might have heard of Google's 20% time, where
Mm-hmm.
you can play with whatever you want. I think was it Marissa Meyer who said that the dirty secret there is it's actually 120%. It's doing
Yeah.
your full-time job mostly.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that's something obviously to bring into consideration.
Yeah.
But I would love to see like peer coaching circles outside
Mm.
the management structure
Yeah.
that's across different levels. And we're
Mm-hmm.
just talking about ideas and we're running
Mm.
some experiments and we're
Yeah.
making choices and seeing what
Mm.
happens.
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea of the peer coaching thing. I think that can be really helpful because I think honestly, some of it is just you feel so trapped inside the own conversations in your own head. And you don't necessarily feel like there's safety to talk to people you don't quite know. Like, so if you set it up in a way where it's organized and there's intention behind it and that maybe there are some guidelines in terms of how that would go, people can step into that a little more and start to feel like, oh, I'm not alone in some of these concerns I have. Oh, you also want to bring more of you into the workplace? Great. Like, what does that look like for you? What does that look like for me? Maybe together, I feel like people might feel like, oh, I have a little more power when I realize other people share some of the same desires there. And then underneath all of this, when you talk about kind of the ongoing conversations and the performance conversations, like it, and maybe this fits into the hierarchy stuff, but so much of that is so glued in to the structure of an organization that, the hierarchy protects it, it feels like. And it's just, there's not necessarily even an opening to think about changing it, because this is what it feels like to me. You're in a hierarchical organization. You go, what if we rethought how we had our performance conversations? It just sets this like string of people thinking of all the ways it's going to make their life harder. Right. And so I think, the peer coaching at least starts you to have those conversations freely, maybe without some of that. Is there anything organizationally and maybe as leaders that you can do to continue to help people resist that urge or that need? Maybe it's a self-protective need sometimes to go down we can't do that because you have to fill out this form and then talk to this person, get approval from this person and all that. How can we shift that way of being and way of thinking as a result?
Mm. Yeah, what springs to mind there is change management.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes we jump to the solution.
Mm-hmm.
I just did, which is let's change the performance management structure.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, take a step back and identify the problem. So right now, we're not doing X, Y, Z, or right now, this is the particular problem that I'm experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree?
Mm-hmm.
Are we collectively agreed, A, that it's a problem,
Mm-hmm.
and B, would you like to do something about it?
Yeah.
Before we jump to C, which is here's the change we'd like to see, and I'm assuming you're moving forward. And
yeah. Yeah. Getting some common ground on is it a problem worth pursuing can be a lot, because again, the problem may feel very big to us, but maybe it's not shared by others. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I have seen is when you raise an issue and ask folks, do they see it as an issue as well? Quite often they will agree.
Mm-hmm.
And then other people will agree. And then there's the sense of, we should do something about that, but I'm really busy. And if you're the person who says, would you like me to take the lead on this? Oftentimes, not always, but often it's a case of, oh, could you? That'd be great. Because, oh, great, that's being taken care of. So then you've got a whole bunch of permission to try something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting how we often just don't realize that, like, by simply being willing to take something on, that it then creates a lot of freedom for you. Yeah. I know we want to start winding things down a little bit here. One thing I like to do is have a question from a previous guest that and this comes from Dan Kent, who is the guest on the previous show. And he is wondering, is there, from a leadership perspective, are there any sort of trends or themes that you're noticing in those who are actually willing to commit resources to developing leadership that is helping to kind of create that investment? Like, is there certain commonalities among those types of organizations who are really willing to invest in leadership development?
What I see is there's usually a person who just believes that it's a good thing to do.
That's so interesting, right? I think it keeps coming back to that there's so much power in the individual, in having the agency and following their curiosity enough to say, I'm going to do this thing. Which certainly feels very empowering versus every like 20 million stars need to align for change to happen, which is, I think, with a story we have in our head sometimes. So the idea that, like, one person, whether it's one leader or even somebody further down the organization, has a lot more agency and power than we think. And that's pretty cool.
You're reminding me of an additional thing, which is vulnerability. I read an article once that described, it was the CEO of an organization. He had taken over a really toxic enterprise. He saw, like, goal number one is, I need to change this culture.
Yeah.
And after his first 6 months in the job, he had a 360-degree feedback review. So a consultant came in, interviewed various people, board, direct reports, peers, and so forth, and presented the report. And what this leader did, which I have I've never heard of a leader doing this, he posted it on the company intranet and shared what he got from it and what he was working on, and that he would be checking back in another 6 months. So that was a major signal.
Yeah.
Sent to the organization. It's one thing for a leader to say, I fully support your development. Go ahead and tell me how that goes. it's a fundamentally different thing to say, I support leadership development and I am a flawed individual myself, as we all are, working on stuff.
Yeah.
And here's what I'm working on. Thank you for the input. And I'm going to work on this and this, and then I'm going to ask you in 6 months how I'm doing. That's
amazing. And it's sort of interesting that we have to acknowledge that we're flawed, because we're all walking around with our shields up, and particularly I think
Instagram best selves. Yes.
Yeah. And, the further you get up into leadership, I think you feel like I have to do that. Mm-hmm. And actually, like, you can see that the power of that simple action of that person, how the opposite is true. Being vulnerable, letting people know that, like, I'm continually working on stuff. I'm in this with you. Mm-hmm. That has so much more influence on how others are going to probably step into their own growth than being, I'm up here on high and I'm not letting you see anything of me, but I'm saying you develop. Such a distinction there. I think you kind of started to answer this, but I want to give you a chance to add any more. You talked about waving the magic wand to help work be more desuckified. Is there anything more you would add to bring that world to life more?
I keep going back to follow your curiosity and run experiments and make choices. There's a piece in the middle of that model, which is compassion. Mm-hmm. It's like we feel like we all have to have this extraordinary life. Mm-hmm. Or a regular life.
Yeah.
And one that you loved. Can we just take the pressure off?
That is a great one. Yeah. That pressure is
raising
real.
Regular life, and even amazing, just my regular life, which I love. And compassion for yourself and for others. Mm-hmm. Your work is bad.
I like that. I think we could all use some compassion for ourselves first, which I think then allows us to maybe share it with others. And that idea of just living a quote unquote regular life, like, doesn't mean you can't accomplish things and do things, but we're all trying to accomplish and do things. That's what humans do. So there's there's no like, I have to step above the pack to do it. We're all sitting here trying to do cool things that help us unlock stuff and hopefully start to solve some of these massive problems that we have created for ourselves. I wanted to come back real quick to the question now for the next week's guest. It's a woman, Kristen Lasante. She's also a coach and focuses a lot on organizational transformation. Do you have a question that I can pass along to her?
I have a couple.
Okay.
I would love to learn what was the biggest change that she's gone through personally in her life, if she's willing to share that. Mm-hmm. And maybe is there traditional advice that she tried that didn't work, and what did she try instead? It sounds like she's got a lot of experience there.
Okay.
And then I'd be curious, has she noticed any shifts pre and post COVID, given her decades-long experience in the whole world of organizational transformation? That would be fun to know.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to know. I will pass those along for sure. Before we head out, a couple last questions. One, which is, a little silly. I always ask people to make a sound effect. It is, part of the show. If you listen to the show, you'll hear sounds, a lot of cat sounds, which is kind of my thing, but I always include any sound that a guest is willing to make. It'll show up in the intro, maybe the outro as well. So do you have a desuckified sound that you're willing to make for us?
I think so.
Okay. Is there any significance to that sound?
Just things pop in your head. And usually it's not a loud noise. It's just like a gentle tap on the shoulder. If you listen to it and just follow the breadcrumbs, that can lead to some pretty magical places.
I love that. Let's listen for that little sound going off in our heads. What is the best way for people to follow you, keep track of all the awesome work you're doing, whether it's social media or your website or websites? How do people find you?
Sure. Right now, LinkedIn is the best place, and a new website is under construction at humanpossibility.com. So
Very cool. Well, I'm very excited for that website because I think we started to dive into a little bit of how to hopefully unlock more of that possibility. And I know that's a big part of what you're focusing on. So I'm grateful that you were putting that out into the world because it's needed. We have real problems that we need to dive into. So thank you for that. And Julie, just thank you for coming on the show and being very generous with all of the ideas and all the stuff you're willing to share. I think this is going to spark a lot of good stuff for a lot of people and hopefully get us all thinking about the possibilities for ourselves and how we can really bring more of ourselves into whatever we do in the world and realize that we have a lot more agency and ownership of that than we might think. So I thank you for bringing that to the foreground for us.
Thank you, TJ. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. And a huge thanks to Julie for bringing hope and a ton of helpful strategies to the show. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share, rate, review, subscribe, or consider hitching a ride on one of Elon's rockets and beaming this show towards the galaxies with the highest likelihood of life. We're underperforming with our alien audiences right now and could use some help. You can follow Julie on LinkedIn and keep an eye out for her soon-to-be-launched site, humanpossibility.com. It will be amazing because Julie is amazing. I think my site and my Substack newsletter are pretty amazing as well. I'm on a mission to make work suck less, and I'd love for you to join me. Want to make that desuckification happen ASAP? Let's set up a free half-hour coaching session. Bye, everyone.